This is Jay Secular. We've got breaking news. Former President Trump slapped with a gag order in the New York City criminal case.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jay Seculo.
Well, this is an unusual move, I have to say. I've been practicing law a long time, and the U.S. court, or the state court in New York City, this is where it's the people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump. This is the criminal case in Manhattan. The judge put in an order that it's highly unusual. Let me read it. And this came on a motion for a protective order that was asked for by the district attorney, Alvin Bragg. So this is what he asked for, and the court granted. And this is what it says. And it's so it basically says any materials and information provided by the people to the defense in accordance with their discovery obligations. That means what you're required, Logan, to put out. If I've got information that's exculpatory and I'm the DA, I've got to give that to the defendant. So any information like that shall be used solely for the purposes of preparing a defense in this matter. It's further ordered that any person who receives the covered materials shall not copy, disseminate, or disclose the material. And then it says, and it specifically says, that includes, but not limited to, when it talks about social media platforms, Truth Social, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Twitter, Snapchat, or YouTube without prior approval from the court. Now, what makes this, to me...
They didn't put Rumble. So, you know?
They did not say Rumble. Well, there you go. Our preferred provider.
Yeah, I'm
there
just
you
saying,
go.
Free speech
It
advocate,
does say, but not limited to.
Oh, it should be limited to. But no, of course, another thing that comes out that seems like it's directly political and targeted at President Trump, not something that normal people would have happen to when you get this kind of gag order for potentially a very extended period of time.
Well, here's why. Well, first of all, you're talking about a trial that may not take place. It may never take place, but it may not be for 18 months or 2 years. Right. The guy is running for president of the United States. He's the leading Republican candidate right now. There's going to be all kind of leaks because that's what these DAs do. And he's not going to be able to defend himself in the court of public opinion. So it raises a very serious First Amendment issue. Andy Economou is on the phone with us. He's in Atlanta today, but I wanted to talk to him. Andy, you and I have tried a lot of cases, and you've tried a lot of cases in state court. It's highly unusual to see an order like this. You do see orders when the jury's sequestered sometimes, or the jury's in deliberations where they limit discussions. But doing this 18 months out before even dispositive motions are filed, it to me is highly unusual.
It is highly unusual, Jay, and I've never seen an order like this in 48 years of practicing law, most of which has been as a prosecutor. So this is an order that effectively is a gag order and a violation, in my view, of the First Amendment rights of Donald Trump. Not only does he not have the right to look at this evidence and to comment on it and to discuss it, but what about his ability to consult with his counsel and to get counsel's aid in looking at documents and preparing a defense and doing the things that you have to do? He is deprived of so much of that by this order, and it's a sweeping order. It's unprecedented, in my opinion, and very ill-advised.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what they call limited dissemination materials are only can be reviewed by the defendant in the presence of his defense counsel. The defendant shall not be permitted to copy, photograph, transcribe, or otherwise independently possess the limited dissemination materials. Now, there could be exculpatory evidence in all of this. And the idea that he cannot, when he's going to be being challenged in advertisements, I mean, understand this. There'll be ads taken out against him, Logan, on these trials.
Of course, yeah.
That he's not going to be able to defend himself? I'm sorry, that doesn't cut it under the First Amendment.
So we're about to go to break. So what is the next step then for them to go after this? Because people will take it and not know what to do.
First Amendment counsel should be retained, and they should challenge this order. First, you got to go back to the judge, then to the appellate division, which is the intermediate court in New York. The Supreme Court of New York is actually the trial court.
Yep.
The appellate division, and then there's the Court of Appeals as the highest court. But I would go right to the appellate division on this immediately.
We'll go over that and more coming up. Also, that shocking poll that came out showing President Trump having a large lead over current President Biden and what it all means. We can break down all those categories a bit later in the show. And also Secretary Mike Pompeo, Rick Grenell, going to be joining us as well. This is the time to call 1-800-684-3110. Have your voice heard on the air. 1-800-684-3110. We will be right back.
The Freedom of Information Act allows people to petition their government and ask for the background information as to why they came to a certain decision.
It's thousands of pages of paper, and in those thousands of pages of paper, you usually find a nugget.
We are entitled as citizens of the United States to know about how our government works.
Government agencies acting out of control.
They want to keep Americans in the dark. That's why it's incredibly important to have the ACLJ constantly pushing to find out what the background information is.
Do you remember the Iran deal? There was a video about what took place on that deal, and it was edited. And the edit took out the key part of what was going on. State Department, White House, editing videos to keep it from the American public.
We have exposed that in our FOIA litigation, and we do that every day that we bring these cases.
We took it to the IRS. No one ever does that. And because of it, it's a very weak government agency that used to be the scary government agency.
What the IRS was doing was violating the Constitution and statutory law. Because of the litigation we engaged in, it's a different agency. They can't do what they were doing before.
We've got the declassified list of Obama administration officials who started asking to unmask, and they've been hiding behind in the shadows. These FOIAs bring them to light.
And all of this information came because we went to court to get the information.
The power of Washington, D.C. only works when the rest of us, the rest of Americans, are kept in the dark.
We may find one item of information in thousands of documents of irrelevancies, but we persist and we're on it every day of our lives.
The work that the ACLJ does matters. It matters to policymakers. It matters to ordinary citizens all across America.
Those of you that support the ACLJ, this is what it's all about at the end of the day.
Think we haven't been on this, folks? We've been on it.
Welcome back to Secular. We are taking your calls at 1-800-684-3110, talking about the breaking news here that President Trump was hit with a gag order and what that means in his current lawsuit. So I think this is something we need to talk about. We need to break down a little bit for those who are like me, who maybe don't know all the ins and outs of the law when it comes to this kind of topic.
Yep.
What does this mean for President Trump moving forward? As we know, the law takes quite a while, and we are heading into an election season rapidly.
He can't defend himself in the court of public opinion.
You said they can attack him still.
Well, Joe Biden's going to attack him. I mean, and other Republicans may attack him in the primaries. So he'll be attacked for this. And he may be holding exculpatory evidence, that is evidence that proves innocence, and he can't discuss it because of a judge deciding to squelch the First Amendment. But I want to go to Harry Hutchinson first on this, because Harry had a really good point when we were in our prep meeting. And it's because I said it's kind of the opposite of what you normally expect, Harry, because normally for the government to do this, there'd have to be, this compelling governmental interest. What would be the compelling governmental interest in saying that the defendant can't protect himself in the court of public opinion? Well, fair trial. But he's the defendant, so if he takes that risk, that's his risk. But you made the point that everything here has been turned upside down.
Absolutely. And if you look at recent American history, we have reversed basically the burden of proof. And so with respect to President Trump, he is presumed guilty before the trial actually occurs. And the judge's order in this particular case, irrespective of the constitutionality of that order, essentially places the burden of proving one's innocence on the defendant. So in a typical case, we are presumed innocent before our peers, before a court of law, but everything is reversed with respect to Trump. Here, Trump, as I suggested earlier, is presumed guilty. Hence, the judge sides with the district attorney of Manhattan and slaps Trump with a gag order when it should be reversed. If any gag order is to be placed on anyone, it should be placed on the Manhattan district attorney. Secondarily, of course, as you point out, Jay, President Trump is unable to defend himself in the court of public opinion with respect to this trial. So if the judge is going to do that, then he needs to impose the same order on each and every potential presidential opponent, including President Biden. They should.
Of course, he has no jurisdiction to do it, right?
Absolutely
But you're
not.
right. You're right.
Under the First Amendment, he wouldn't be able to do that. So I think it's very, very unfair,
It really
and I
is.
think the American people will see through this.
I think so.
Good comments coming in. Someone from Rumble asked, what if they brought this up in the debate? Does he have to not respond? And then, our producer actually said, well, tomorrow night on CNN, he's got that town hall. Again, what if that was approached then?
Well, I think this presents the real problem here. I mean, it puts the former president, the current leading Republican, as far as running for front runner for the primaries, puts him in an untenable situation where accusations or questions, as Logan said, a question from a debate host or a moderator or a question from the media, and when he's doing a town hall like he's doing tomorrow night, and all of a sudden you're in a situation where he can't even defend himself.
Well, this is the problem, the serious underlying problem with this order, Jay, and that is the fact that it violates basically, that when you really get down to it, the First Amendment. I am given by the state exonerative or exculpatory evidence which shows I'm not guilty of the crime, in this case, Donald Trump and the accusations. He wants to use that to exonerate himself in the public debate or in any other public forum that he is present at, and he can't use it because the judge says you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to exonerate yourself. And it's exactly as Professor Hutchison said. The whole thing of our system of presumption of innocence has been turned upside down. The person who is guilty here, presumably and initially, is Donald Trump. Now, President Trump, you come into court and prove your innocence. And if there's exculpatory information, you can't use it. Or if there's anything you want to discuss that the district attorney has brought up, you're not allowed to do so. So this is the problem with this. It perverts the sense and the system of justice that we have in this country, and it prevents the president from getting anything near a fair trial before this judge, which, as I may say, is what he predicted was going to happen.
Yeah, and it's also the problem here is, Logan, is that he also is limited as to evidence that he can review and what he can do with this evidence. And I can imagine the attack ads already.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You can see the ads.
They're probably already in production as we know it, as these kind of things happen. Especially if you have a topic that can be unopposed and they have no commentary run back on it. Why not? I mean, this would be the political dream to have something that a candidate can't even respond to legally.
This is totally ridiculous. So, I mean, it needs to be challenged aggressively. We're taking your calls at 800-684-3110. Let's go to the phones.
Yep, let's go ahead. Let's go to Jerry in Rhode Island. You're on the air.
I just, based on what Jay said, Professor Hutchins said, Mr. Economou said, this could be all ordered before. Just how fast can this get fast-tracked to unmuzzle Trump and his defense? How fast can they get fast-tracked?
Yeah, I think, Jerry, an emergency order to the appellate division, which is their first-tier appellate court. In fact, you probably got to go back to the judge for a motion for. I'm not 100% sure on the New York procedure. I've done a lot of cases in New York, and I've done some in the state court systems. I've argued at the appellate division, and the Court of Appeals is our highest court. So my sense is that you would file an emergency appeal because this puts him in an untenable spot. He's doing tomorrow a town hall. What is he going to do, not answer to this? I mean, not answer these questions? And it does turn the First Amendment upside down. So I think it can move rather quickly. But I think it's a serious impediment to free speech here, Harry. I mean, you and I spend a lot of time in our careers dealing with free speech issues. The compelling governmental interest to muzzle the president the former president, while he's going to be attacked is just absurd.
I think that is correct. And indeed, from an objective perspective, there is no compelling state interest here. However, the compelling interest that the judge accepts in this particular case, I think, is that the Manhattan District Attorney has a very weak or questionable case, and he is trying to strengthen the government's case. I don't know enough about the situation in New York and the practice rules in New York, but I also wonder if there's an avenue for going to federal court so that he can he can vindicate, if you will, his First Amendment rights to speak out on issues of public concern. This is an issue of paramount public concern, and the people of America want to hear from Donald Trump.
So in the case that I had for the president, former president, at the Supreme Court, Trump versus Vance, they said federal jurisdiction could be appropriate in these kind of situations. And, Andy, I think when you add to it the First Amendment aspect of that, I think a challenge in federal court, and then ultimately you can get it to the Supreme Court fairly quickly. They've not been very hospitable to President Trump, former President Trump's cases. But this is a unique situation. He will be attacked probably starting this week. He will be asked questions maybe as early as tomorrow, and he can't, Andy, defend himself according to this judge's order. If he has exculpatory evidence, he cannot mention it.
Well, that's the problem that bothers me so severely, Jay, is the fact that there is exculpatory and exonerative evidence that will be proffered by the Manhattan DA. He's got to give it under the Brady versus Maryland case, and the President Trump is unable to counter that by pointing to that evidence. And as Harry Hutchison said, apparently he's got a weak case, Bragg, so you've got a judge coming in, at the last minute to help him. But the other thing that bothers me is that he cannot discuss this with his lawyers. That undermines the effective right to counsel. The lawyers can only show him certain parts of documents that they get. Who ever heard of nonsense like that? You have a document and you want to discuss it with your counsel and your client, and you can't do it except you can only show them certain paragraphs and certain lines. This is wrong. This needs to be taken to a United States District Court, which is the primary vindicator of federal rights, in Stanner immediately.
Right. So if they ask him tomorrow, any response, what happens?
He could be held in contempt of court, technically. So a motion could be made by Alvin Bragg to take the president's response and say he violated your order because he discussed evidence. Evidence could be, my gosh, anything, even what they have, what the defense has, and say, or testimony that other people that have already testified publicly. That's what's so absurd. So much of this is out in the public. But you raised the right question. But why are they putting their hands on the scale on this? Why is a New York State court judge tipping their hands and putting their hands on this? And I'll tell you why. I don't know if we have that soundbite of me at the Supreme Court of the United States. Do we have that?
When we get back.
When we get back, we are going to play it because it's precisely what I said. If we don't get it this segment, we'll get it the next. But we'll get it.
Well, we're heading to break now. We'll be joined next by Rick Grinnell later in the show, Mike Pompeo. So you want to stay tuned, and other ACLJ experts as well. Give us a call if you want to be on the air, 1-800-684-3110. If you're watching on Rumble or on our other outlets like YouTube or Facebook, make sure you get some comments in. Share this with your friends because we got a great show coming up. Still a lot to cover. We're also going to go over that poll that you may have heard of that came out over the weekend, and really a lot of it spilled over to yesterday, where President Biden take a big dip and President Trump rising in the polls and what this could mean. And this isn't from some conservative outlet. This is from ABC News. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes.
When we see something, when we hear something, when we're concerned about an issue, we don't just talk about it. We do something about it. And that goes to our Government Accountability Project.
If we allow leaders in Washington, D.C. to make decisions behind closed doors, unaccountable to the people, then we are going to get skewed and corrupt decisions.
There are lots of other places that do lots of important work for America, but the ACLJ has taken up a lane which is irreplaceable.
The Freedom of Information Act, that's a statute that allows us to get information from the government. It starts with a letter from our offices in Washington to these agencies, and it says, give us this information on these topics. And generally, they don't. And then we go to court.
We go through a series of lengthy negotiations back and forth about what they'll give or what they won't give. We may get tons of information that's redacted, and we have to then go back and say, you redacted too much. We can't really find out what you're giving us because it makes no sense. So it goes through a process of litigation.
That is how you get information, and that office is going to be more active now more than ever.
The ACLJ has been extremely active in vigorously seeking to hold these bureaucrats accountable. We have filed hundreds of FOIA requests. We have received over 20,000 pages of documents in our litigation.
Holding them accountable, holding the Biden administration accountable so that all Americans are able to have faith in their government.
We will up our efforts. We will not stop.
You're finding a nugget in a gold mine. Occasionally you'll come up with something that is really a bombshell, but you have to persist in doing it, and that's what we do.
That's a little bit of what we do through our Office of Government accountability, and of course that comes under our Office of Government Affairs. So your support of the ACLJ supports all of that.
Welcome back to Set Kill. We'll be joined by Rick Grinnell in just a moment. When we were headed to break, you wanted to play a sound clip from,
let me set it up.
From the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah,
in case you had, we didn't hear because all the Supreme Court cases at this point were done remotely due to COVID. And
it was Trump versus Vance. It was against the district attorney, and it was the issue there was tax returns. But I said, what you're doing, I opened the court argument with this. I said, you're weaponizing these DAs, and that's what you're doing. And that prediction became a reality. Here's what I actually said from this very room to the Supreme Court of the United States on a case involving this DA's office.
The Second Circuit is wrong. It should be reversed. If not reversed, the decision weaponizes 2,300 local DAs. An overwhelming number of them are elected to office and are thereby accountable to their local constituencies. The decision would allow any DA to harass, distract, and interfere with the sitting president. Subjects the president to local prejudice that can influence prosecutorial decisions, and to state grand juries who can then be utilized to issue compulsory criminal process in the form of subpoenas targeting the president. This is not mere speculation. It is precisely what has taken place in this case.
Well, call me Nostradamus because I got that one right. I said exactly what they said would happen, happened. And that is you've weaponized these DAs, and now they get a gag order so that the current leader in the Republican side of this for the nomination, Donald Trump, former president of the United States, can be attacked mercilessly without any hindrance. They could attack him, and Rick Grinnell's joining us, and they could run ads against him. That'll be Republicans and Democrats, by the way, and they're going to run ads about these cases. And he, according to this judge, here's what he can say. Nothing. Which is, by the way, the opposite of what the First Amendment works. So I said it. You're weaponizing these DAs. They put their thumb on the scale of an election, and, Rick, they're doing it again.
Yeah, imagine being accused of something and it publicly going out of what you're being accused of. Everybody gets to talk about it. Everybody gets to speculate about it. Everybody gets to use politics to pretend like it's bigger than it was, and you can't speak. I mean, look, this is par for the course when it comes to Trump. Washington, D.C. has put the word out that they don't want this guy to come back. All of Washington, D.C., the media, the newsrooms, the political types, all of the elites. Think about that. Washington, D.C. is so afraid of Donald Trump that they will do and say anything, and they constantly talk about him and push him. Even the reporters who are supposed to be covering the White House, Joe Biden's White House, constantly just talk about Donald Trump. They cannot get enough of this. And so you eventually, the rest of us outside of D.C. have to ask ourselves, why? Why are they so afraid of Donald Trump? Why do they spend every waking moment trying to knock this guy out? It's because when he goes there, he doesn't play by their rules.
But the rule that this judge took the First Amendment and literally turned it upside down. I mean, literally. So they would have to argue there's a compelling governmental interest to protect the defendant. That's the compelling governmental interest to a fair trial. So the way they're doing it is everybody will run an ad saying how bad this guy is and what he did in New York is a crime, and the Democrats will run it, Republicans will run it too, and it's going to be out there, and he's going to be doing a town hall tomorrow at CNN, and they ask him, and he says, I can't talk about that, even though I've got exculpatory evidence in my hand. I cannot discuss it. To me, that is totally absurd. And what the former president's lawyers need to do is take that to the appellate division, which is their court of appeals. Let me get out of the domestic, Rick, and move over to the foreign policy in the Middle East. Now, a lot of turmoil last night in Israel because of attacks by Hamas and in cahoots with Hezbollah, which is no great shock. But I looked at the situation, I knew you were going to be on today, and I said, the Middle East seems to be returning to the Obama-Biden era of Middle East turmoil rather than when you were in office and we had the most progress on peace that we'd seen with Israel's neighbors, including
with the Abraham Accords and all.
Abraham Accords, Muslim countries, predominantly Muslim countries, working with Israel in joint economic deals. And now it seems like we're in fast-forward reverse.
Look, I've spent 8 years at the UN, and the one thing that I've learned is that without American leadership, little gets done. And we don't have leadership from the Joe Biden team. I mean, Jay, I'm telling you, I don't think that there's a country in the world or region in the world that is better off today under Joe Biden's leadership than 3 or 4 years ago. It just, every region is in crisis. You see the UAE, our great ally, and they've been bombed by rebels that were taken off the terrorist watch list, the Houthis. You see chaos now between Israel and Arab governments, and we had the opposite effect. Don't forget that all these smarty pants in Washington, D.C. told us that if Donald Trump came into office, there'd be World War III. And not only was that not true, but the opposite was true. He brought in peace between the Arabs and the Israelis. This is weak American leadership. Everybody knows this outside of Washington. Everybody sees it very clearly.
Yeah, and Rick, it looks like the polls are showing that. Something we're about to discuss here in the next segment coming up is the ABC News poll that shows President Trump actually having a pretty significant lead, a lead that if you were going into the election day for Joe Biden would be disastrous. As America seems to be maybe waking up from what's happening right now. I mean, obviously you have to judge polls a year and a half out with a grain of salt, but the fact that not some Fox News poll or a Newsmax poll or whatever, this is coming from ABC News, and certainly you have people like Donna Brazile saying it's time for the Democratic Party to wake up and realize that maybe they thought their sure thing of Joe Biden's second term may not be the case, and the polls are showing that.
Look, politics is always about promises of what I will do, and people who have a slick speech and they talk a good game and they make promises, and people then say, oh, I like that vision, I like that promise, I'm going to vote for that politician because of what they're promising. But reality has struck the 2024 race. We haven't had a situation in modern history where we get to show the actual achievements of the two people running for president. You can see the Biden world affairs and the Biden economy, and you can see the Trump world affairs and the Trump economy. It's not about promises of what I might do. It's about the reality of what the situation is. And people see that. And when faced with a Joe Biden economy versus Donald Trump economy, it's a landslide victory for Trump.
I appreciate it, Rick. Thanks for the insight, as always. We're going to go ahead and thanks for being with us. Let's take Lisa's call. We've got time. We've got a minute and a half here.
All right, Lisa in California, you're on the air.
Hey, Lisa.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm just wondering if Donald Trump, can't use this to his advantage and just simply tell the truth whenever asked, a question. Can't he just respectively respond and say, I'm sorry, I'm forbidden to speak to defend myself?
But I think that, Rick, I'll let you jump on this quickly. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, not your question, Lisa. The question's fine. But I think that's ridiculous to silence a candidate for public office. If the First Amendment's designed to protect anything, it's religious and political speech. Rick?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's un-American to think that we have somebody running for president or just an ordinary citizen that can't speak his mind, that the courts have come forward to say, don't speak. Outrageous.
I'm with you. I think this has got to be challenged. They should do that. If they challenge it, I'd file a brief in support of that challenge. I think it's ridiculous. All right, thanks, everybody. We're going to be here for another half hour. Thanks, Rick. We'll be here for another half hour.
That's right. If you don't get us on your local station or you just want to watch us, if you're listening right now, find us broadcasting live every day, noon Eastern, noon to 1, or archive later on, aclj.org. You can find us all your favorite podcast apps, obviously on Rumble, on YouTube, on Facebook. But if you are listening in that noon to 1 Eastern time right now and you lose us on your station, find us live right now, aclj.org, or all our platforms.
In 2021, 2 Yemeni nationals on the FBI terror watch list were caught by U.S. Border Patrol agents. This was a heroic moment. Deep state officials silenced the heroism of our border agents who put their lives on the line to keep us safe. The White House doesn't want you to know they've lost all control of the border. If it wasn't for the work of the ACLJ filing a Freedom of Information Act request, you would never have known how close terrorists came to disappearing into the shadows of our city streets. We were able to do this all thanks to you. Keep us in the fight. To learn more, go to aclj.org/coverup.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. And now your host, Jay Seculo.
Broadcast. We spent the first half hour talking about this ridiculous and highly unusual gag order that's been placed on the former president out of the district attorney made a motion in the Supreme Court of New York. That's their trial court, by the way. That's not their appellate review. They just call it the Supreme Court. And they issued this gag order where the president basically cannot defend himself based on evidence, although he'll be attacked without mercy during this election season that's already underway, and it will get more intense as days go ahead. So this is outrageous. It's a total violation of free speech. I think what Harry Hutchinson said is true. Normally you have the presumption of innocence. If you're Donald Trump, you have the presumption of guilt. I mean, that's kind of the way this goes. And this judge is implementing orders that literally, we've spent our life defending the right to free speech. So if someone wants to attack a candidate for public office by running an ad that says, we don't like this, you're about to do this, you're going to go to jail, you're going to be indicted, they have the right to do it. But the candidate has a right to defend themselves. And the fact that there's a local district attorney, a local county district attorney, that's all this is, in the middle of this during an election, which is the reason why you don't indict close to elections, but that didn't seem to matter in New York, even though this case was the zombie case and was entombed 3 other times by other lawyers who said this is no case. Now they're saying you can't defend yourself from the attacks you know you're going to get, let alone the debate. And, CC, we've argued free speech cases our entire career, and it literally is turning the First Amendment upside down here.
Yeah, but we see that, I think, every time Trump is involved. Just like Harry said, you're presumed innocent, except if you're Trump. You have the First Amendment right to speak, except if you're Trump. And they know exactly that he will defend himself, so they're taking that ability away from him preemptively.
I just don't understand. If the idea is you want to protect the fairness of a trial, right? I mean, that's normally how these are done. So what you would do is you would say, well, what's the compelling governmental interest here is, protecting the fairness of the trial. But this is the defendant. This is the accused. So it's not like the DA maybe they could say, we don't want you putting the evidence out there. But my goodness, the defense has the right to talk about exculpatory evidence that the DA may have had to hand over, as Andy said, because of what's called Brady material. And that's what this whole process, that's why you got to get this into federal court. Go ahead.
Yeah,
we got callers.
We do. Let's go to Chris, who's calling in Missouri. Chris got an interesting comment. I guess we'll take him. Chris, you're on the air.
Hey there. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a branding coach, and I had the privilege to meet Eric Trump at the Reawaken America tour in Branson. And I told him I had a solution. I said if they arrested his father and there were a gag order enforced, he should continue the rallies and hire that Captain Deplorable guy that does the impeccable impression of his dad.
There's some really good ones out there, I have to say.
Just send him on the road, send some impersonators on the road.
Or maybe send him out anyways. Even if he's not, you could cover more territories this way.
I mean, I think Saddam Hussein would do that. I mean, I feel like that's when you saw. That's the only thing I think of.
We're not going to compare them to.
Yeah, Putin, I think, had the fake Putins running around. You saw those guys everywhere. But no, I just remember that picture of the boat with all of the Saddams. That was always that picture.
Uh-huh.
But Chris, it's a ridiculous idea that we think that maybe hologram Trump. That's a better hologram Trump because it can actually be him. You could put it on the road like ABBA is doing right now. You could do that. So
ABBA's doing what?
You go see it in an arena, but they are
not there.
They're
why would I not?
Computer generated on a screen.
Why would I go?
Because it's a whole experience. It's supposed to be fun. It's the new technology. It's how it's happening. So he's right. There are ways to do that, but I think that may be a little bit of a gray area there. But I know it's a funny comment.
It's not such a gray area. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Telling a guy that's running for president you can't talk, you can't defend yourself in the court of a public opinion. Let me explain something to you. That doesn't work. Okay, that's not the way the system's set up to work. All right, we're going to take your calls. We got a brand new filing in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. We've got a interesting poll result. We want to talk about that more. I think Cece's going to stay with us. Harry's going to join us. 1-800-684-3110 if you've got any questions. 800-684-3110. As we're getting near the season here, I wonder how you all are. Which candidate you leaning for? 1-800-684-3110. We'll take your calls on that. 684-3110. Don't forget to support the work of the ACLJ. You do that at aclj.org.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about those polls coming up because I think there is a really important one. We're seeing the mainstream press. We're seeing liberals and Republicans kind of reacting in a way that maybe you wouldn't see this far out. So we're going to discuss that coming up in the next segment. We'll take your calls on that at 1-800-684-3110. There are lines open, which is rare, so give us a call.
The ACLJ has a 30-plus year history of fighting on behalf of you, our members, in support of life.
What this case is all about are people speaking out. Abortion's murder.
Religious liberty.
A pastor stuck overseas since last year. A Turkish court has freed American pastor Andrew Brunson.
Justice, personal freedom, and constitutional government. Our freedoms are under attack. Now, more than ever.
We are not going back. Abortion is healthy.
Yet another week of violence.
The radical left has hijacked the media, our public schools, and 2 branches of government. They use their power and influence to push deeply un-American causes that threaten to destroy our country. Abortion on demand, socialism, inflation, cancel culture. Weakness in the face of our adversaries. This is the future the left would create for America.
You have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price.
We have to step up and stop this madness. We owe it to our kids and grandkids to defend the things that make this country great. The ACLJ has always answered the call, but there's more to be done. We are announcing the launch of ACLJ Action, a 501c4 advocacy organization that will extend your reach beyond the courtroom. As our sister organization, ACLJ Action will engage new people and new expertise to effectively advocate for our shared values and priorities. This new effort will focus not just on using the law to defend your rights, but on stopping the left's march towards socialism. It's time to take the gloves off and uphold American values. Go to acljaction.org to learn more.
Welcome back to Seculo. I told you we dive into this. It's a pretty interesting poll that comes out of ABC News, and it is maybe I think the lowest a president approval rating has ever been since we started the polling process, and under 40%. I'm trying to find the exact number in front of me, but what you have is a pretty interesting, just 44% see Biden's presidential opponent. Obviously it's a big numbers. If we could break those down, can I get those in more of a broken down form here? I know it's in here somewhere. Hold on, I've got to flip to the pages. But we saw is that Donald Trump's taking a 8-point lead,
which is surprising,
over Joe
against
Biden.
the sitting president. I mean that's telling, and I think that's the pain of the economy. I think it's global affairs are in.
And 68% say he's just too old. This is not just Republicans, by the way. This is Republicans and Democrats
That's
who are
an
polling
ABC
here.
Washington Post
Washington
poll.
Post saying almost 70% of people who are just concerned about his age. They're not concerned about whether they're going to vote Republican or Democrat. They likely would still probably get in there and vote for it, but they're just concerned about him making it through effectively another 4 years.
You know, it's interesting, Harry. This early out. I mean, we're pretty early. We're a year and 2 months from a year and 3 months from an election, but we're getting into primary season. That's starting this summer. I mean, it starts the summer before. I mean, the election's in 2024, but the primaries start in 2023, usually a little bit later in the year. And the first early primaries are in January and February, but you got the straw poll and the Iowa State Fair and all that's coming up. Yeah. It's interesting there's that kind of gap. Go ahead.
Yeah, and if you look at it, this is a hypothetical, obviously, if it was Trump and Biden right now, heading into, obviously, November 2024, 44% of Americans said they definitely or probably vote for Trump, and 38% said they would vote for Biden. That's with a 12% undecided. And most of those were leaning over Trump for the undecided vote. So again, you don't see these kind of polls this far out typically.
Unusual.
Where there's this extreme of a difference, unless it's a long shot candidate that's not going to make it.
Interesting would be to historically what the polls were like for Jimmy Carter against Reagan. Now, this is, Trump's not the nominee yet. I mean, he's the leading Republican.
He's the leading Republican candidate by a mile at this point. I mean, it's
by like 20 or 30
It would
points.
be a heck of a run from any of the people who are currently announced, even people who aren't currently announced, to really put up a fight. And I don't like saying that necessarily because I want to see fresh people in there. I really think it would have been interesting to not have Biden and not have Trump and have two new people to represent the parties.
That's not where it's going to be.
That is looking more and more unlikely as time moves on. But I think there's more of a chance that Biden isn't the person than there is Trump isn't the candidate.
I think that's very possible. I think that you're not going to know who they are until they are the nominee. I mean, that is the truth. But it is interesting this far out to see this kind of disapproval ratings. And I think a lot of it has to do with, Harry, the economic situation when we talked about that on the broadcast yesterday, this kind of feeling of unease in a geopolitical sense. I think all of that.
I think you're correct. So if you add in the banking crisis, if you add in the energy crisis, if you add in President Biden's mental acuity, it is clear that President Biden faces headwinds. But Trump's lead in the poll results are absolutely stunning because Donald Trump faces many legal headwinds. Many of them are front and center, but people are still, right now at least, supporting Trump over Biden. I also think that one of the drags on the Biden presidency and his campaign is that things are beginning to catch up with him internally, including Kamala Harris and her poor performance, Karine Jean-Pierre and her poor performance. And so I think all of these things are combining to basically place a huge weight on the Biden presidency.
Yeah, I always feel sorry for the press person, though. I mean, I will say this for Karine Jean-Pierre because they only are given the information, and they got, it's like the old "don't shoot the messenger." But, I mean, she's been put in a very difficult situation, and with the Washington Post also saying, hey, when is Joe Biden going to do a press conference and answer questions from the press? And he does this one that airs at midnight or 11 o'clock on MSNBC on Friday night.
I'm trying to think, when was the last time there was a press secretary that got glowing reviews from both sides? I feel like they're always the ones taking the heat.
They are. I mean, Sarah Huckabee
did a good job. I mean, she didn't get heat, but you had all the Trump ones, obviously, mainly because it was Trump.
Dana Perino, not so much.
Yeah, it was kind of a turn.
A different time.
Different time. You kind of saw that move. But yeah, let's just rapidly go through some of these poll numbers. I think we should read 56% of Americans disapprove of Biden's performance as president. Again, this is coming from ABC News. Only 36% approve. 54% of Americans think Trump did a better job in handling the economy. Only 36% think Biden is doing a better job. That's a big one, as we know, as we've seen in our internal polling here, even internal research and some of the external research that we get due to this broadcast and other things we do, that the economy is number one.
Always.
Right now, everything else, if you're seeing social issues and those things that we typically talk about on this broadcast, simply right now people are worried about themselves, as they should be in some ways, because they're seeing the chaos break out around them. And I think that is where you have a for a real shakeup come next November. They said a Trump-Biden rematch. 44% of Americans said they would definitely or probably vote for Trump, and only 38% said they would definitely probably vote for Biden. 54% of Americans think Joe Biden is not trustworthy. 63% of Americans don't think Biden has the mental sharpness it takes to serve effectively as president, and 62% don't think his physical health is good enough to serve effectively.
I mean,
and oddly, because they're not that different in age.
No, but there's an energy level.
There is. 54% of Americans think Trump has the mental sharpness it takes to serve effectively as president. 64% think he's in good enough physical health to serve effectively.
Did a majority think he should be held guilty?
Yes, and then a majority of it said, though we'd vote for him, we think he should be held liable for criminal activity. So it is a bit of a mess. And obviously you're asking these people who are doing the poll, I'm not sure exactly what the sample size was, 100 questions. And it can kind of skew a little bit. But this is at the margin of error at this point.
No, but let me say what this is. Okay, this is elections have consequences. I'm going to bring up a case that we're filing a brief in today, and it's the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the FDA. And this is on the abortion pill issue, and it's gone up to the Supreme Court. Now it's back to the Fifth Circuit. We filed at the Fifth Circuit. But this is where election have consequences because there was a policy change that took place from the Trump administration, which was decidedly pro-life, to the Biden administration, which decidedly is not. And that resulted in now litigation because of CC. Explain to everybody what was going on in this case. It was the abortion pill.
Sure. So mifepristone is an abortion pill that causes actually kills the baby, and then it's all by medication. And so this was a case against the FDA, how they approved it quickly, and disregarding all the bad side effects that happen from this pill. But as we've gone through the different regulations on this pill, in 2021, they allowed it to be dispensed by mail. And that's
not allowed before.
That is not allowed before. And there is a federal statute that absolutely makes it a federal crime to send any abortion pills through the mail. And that's what we address in our
the problem is it went to the Supreme Court, and only 2 justices thought to stop it. So it's got an uphill climb here, Harry, this law. But we've got to fight.
I think that is correct, but I also think you are very correct in your initial point that elections have consequences. A lot of the rules and a lot of the headwinds that the pro-life cause face come from an administration that is adamantly, stubbornly hostile to life. And so I think the Health and Human Services director continues to issue new directives aimed at expanding abortion access, notwithstanding the Dobbs decision. And I think that is very important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and against federal law. And that's what we point out. And then you have the Office of Legal Counsel coming in and saying, oh, well, that federal law doesn't say what it says. Yeah. And so that's where we come in and say you can't do things that are against federal law.
We're filing this brief that I'm holding in my hand, a copy of it. We're filing this afternoon in the U.S. Court. May have already filed it in the U.S. Court. We have filed it. Yeah, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. So you're represented, folks, that are members of the ACLJ. We're taking action on this, Logan.
By going to aclj.org and supporting the work. When you do that, it makes sure these type of things keep happening, that we're able to effectively change and effectively make not only new policy, new law, get involved in these conversations in a way that other people can't. And I think that's what's most important. We don't come here and we don't just spew a bunch of words at you. You turn off your radio, you turn off your podcast, and then you move on with your day. We have an incredible team of staff who's out there doing the job.
Look at the 2 things we talked about, or 3 things we talked about today. We talked about this gag order on the former president. If that goes to the appellate division, I said the ACLJ would file a First Amendment brief. We're First Amendment lawyers. That's what we do. We would file a brief there. We talked with Rick a little bit about the Middle East situation. We have an office in Jerusalem. In fact, we'll have some reports out of Jerusalem on next week's broadcast. And then we talked about the life issue, and right there front and center, tough case, uphill battle, but so was overturning Roe. Was an uphill battle, but we ultimately, by God's grace, we prevailed. So the ACLJ's involved all of this because you support the work of the ACLJ. And you also keep this broadcast on the air, because this broadcast doesn't stay on the air unless you support the work of the ACLJ. So whether it's this broadcast, whether it's the briefs that we're filing in courts here in the United States or around the globe, your support of the ACLJ makes a huge difference. CeCe's going to be heading to Geneva in a bit to deal with the UN on some matters. So we got a lot going on, folks. Your support of the ACLJ makes a huge difference.
Yeah, you just go to aclj.org. You can make that donation or just support the work that we're doing here. I also just encourage you to take in all the content, all the incredible free content that's there. Great blogs, great news stories, video content. And if you want to find more of that, we're also on all your favorite social media platforms. But when we get back, we'll be joined by Mike Pompeo. So stay tuned for that to wrap up the broadcast. We'll be right back.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre dodged several reporters' questions about why President Biden doesn't participate in formal press conferences. Here's what she had to say.
Is the administration trying to protect the president from our questions? Please, I answer
Absolutely
that question.
not. Absolutely not.
So why the lack of any interaction in a formal setting to have a press conference?
Certainly, the president many times has stood in front of all of you, has taken questions on his own, because he wanted to see what was all on your minds. He wanted to see what the questions you all were going to ask him, and he wanted to answer them directly. That has happened multiple times, many times during this administration, and that will certainly continue to be.
He's announced he's running for president, and he's disappeared. That's what the campaign is going to be. But when they talk a lot about affecting democracy and democracy in decline, when you're not willing to talk to the American people and you're the person who's responsible, that's an attack on democracy. This silencing and keeping everyone in the dark, that's an attack on democracy. So we deserve to have conferences. We are owed them.
Why the lack of any interaction in a formal setting to have a press conference?
I mean, the president takes shouted questions.
This is not the norm.
So I'll say this. It is also unprecedented that a president takes as many shouted questions as this president has. And he has.
I know the administration, I'll tell you, almost every day.
Trump did, on average, twice as many formal press conferences as Joe Biden. Joe Biden really ranks at the bottom here.
They don't want to put him in that setting because it would show that his age is showing and he's not able to handle that kind of a pressure.
This is a man who very successfully ran and beat Donald Trump in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic, not getting before the public very often, very famously kind of running from the basement.
Right.
Welcome back to the broadcast, everyone. And we are joined by our senior counsel for global affairs, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mike, you have a new piece up at ACLJ.org. It's really focusing on the school situation that we're now starting to see the consequences of during COVID, the closing of the schools and the teachers union involvement of this. Why do you think the head of the teachers union is kind of trying to rewrite history now?
Jay, good morning to you. It's pretty easy. You can see what hell she wrought on kids all across our country. You can now see the data, right? These kids are continuing to suffer. The long-term implications for students that were in some of our most difficult urban neighborhoods are staggering and will be with them for a good part of their lives. And so the reason the teachers unions are now trying to tell a fib, a lie, about what they actually did to these kids is because they fear that they will in the end have to be held accountable. If not by someone else, they know in their own heads, they know the decisions that they made, frankly, just to protect their unions, to protect their power. They know those decisions were the wrong ones. The evidence is out there and it is mounting. And so they are running away from those decisions just as quickly as they can do it.
You know, we had a project that we launched during COVID because we saw that underserved kids, those that are less fortunate, less privileged, those that are in the inner city that didn't have access to internet, and that was the only way they were getting class instruction. We represented about 1,500 families, Mike, during that period of time. Probably much more than that. That was the initial, I think, first week. I think it was probably multiple thousands of families around the country. And these were mostly kids that couldn't afford to get the kind of, access to the internet they had. We had stories of police cars pulling up to neighborhoods so that the kids could get the internet off of the police car so they could see their classes. But these teachers union, without thinking about the students, really took this on their head. And you said that Randy Weingarten, you considered one of the most dangerous people in the country in that regard because of the havoc that this brought on young kids and students generally, but especially in the inner city.
You have it exactly right, Jay. Randy Weingarten remains one of the most dangerous people to our country, to our republic. She and her teachers unions don't care about these kids. They knew, right? We had people at grocery stores who were working. We had people working in hospitals. We had people working all across the country, but they didn't think teachers were essential enough employees. We also knew, and they knew, that there wasn't big spread. We could see Europe's schools reopened early on in the summer of 21. They could see this all happening. So in the summer of 20, you could see this. And so they knew that both the data and the science were against them. And yet they were trying to hold out to protect a group of teachers, radical unionized teachers that didn't want to come back into the classroom. And they didn't care about the kids. And one of the things that you ought to be most proud of, and everybody that's listening ought to be most proud of, is the ACLJ did care about these kids and does care about them. And the work that's been done on school choice is a very powerful work. And frankly, if there's a good thing that came from this, Jay, if there's one good thing that came, is I think parents and teachers got a chance to peer behind the classroom window and to see what the teachers unions were doing to their children. And I think the school choice movement and parents making better decisions for their kids will only accelerate as a direct result of the horrible work that Randy Weingarten did to make life so difficult for our most challenged students.
You talk about the parents getting to see what was going on in their classrooms. Do you remember, this is going back a couple of years already, that the unions did not want parents looking in on the classes that were being done online? They were being done remotely, and they didn't want the parents looking in on the actual classes to see what was actually going on. That was one of the union's positions.
No, it's remarkable. When you go back and look at what they actually said and did and compare it to what Randy Weingarten said in congressional testimony, I mean, it's fantasy land, right? They were against us from the get-go. And not only that, you're right, they didn't want them to see what was on their screens. And by the way, they told us, no, don't worry, they'll be just fine. And yet, for decades, they said, no, you can't do online learning. That kids can't learn that way. And then they forced these kids into online learning for 2 years. And we all know the human interaction matters. That what they did was indecent. It was done knowing that they would reduce the capacity for these children to actually be productive citizens. And the teachers' unions should forever be shamed. And, you talk about accountability. Hard to figure out how to hold Randi Weingarten personally accountable for this other than to talk about what she did. But I'm convinced that parents and communities are going to hold the school systems accountable for failing these kids. And you're going to see parents demand that they know what their kids are learning, and they're going to put their kids in schools that are actually delivering educational outcomes for their children.
I actually think we're seeing that now. I mean, I think parents have realized what's happened, and they're starting to see it. I want to change topics and go to the border. Okay, so Title 42 expires. It was put in place during the pandemic. It expires now. But there's nothing taking its place. And what do you expect that we're going to be seeing? You were the head of the CIA. You were the Secretary of State. We got a mess on the southern border. Immigration control is never easy. But it seems like to me in this particular case, we're about to be seeing a surge like we've never seen before.
Yeah, I think what you will see starting probably even as we're speaking, the numbers will be staggering. I mean, I saw somebody saying that they think it's now 9,000 people a day. Think about that. That means in the course of 30 days, you're going to get more people than in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. Just think about that. A pretty good sized city, right? Yep. This is staggering. You're going to see people released. They're going to do no checking on criminal backgrounds. They're going to do no checking against the terror watch list. They're going to have no ability to protect young girls who have been trafficked across the border. They'll do nothing to stop all the drugs. This is going to be an open border at the scale that the world has not seen in an awfully long time. And in America, in a place that we know how to do better, we know with a set of policies, whether it's Title 42 or the protocols we had in place that became known as Remain in Mexico, these things actually work to protect American sovereignty so that we can have a immigration policy that is lawful and decent and not the horrific one the Biden administration is foisting upon our country today. It's really dangerous, Jay.
We have a video up at ACLJ.org that goes into we did a FOIA litigation on why the Department of Homeland Security was compelled to take down an announcement where they had caught 2 Yemeni individuals that were on the terror watch list, and they apprehended them, which was a great thing, and they put that up, and the FBI had them take it down because they didn't want that information out. And we got that information by going to federal court. We've got a video that's up at ACLJ.org. But we've got a porous border, and a porous border means trouble for the United States. And it's whether it's drug trafficking, sex trafficking, human trafficking. This is a real crisis that we are facing as a country, Mike.
This is a decision that was made by President Biden. We don't need to say, gosh darn, this is too bad and this is the way it is. This was a political decision that the Biden administration made to open these borders to align with the most radical progressive part of his party. We can do better. America must do better. We know how to do better. Don't let them tell you, gosh, you got to go solve the problem, the root causes in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala. No, we can solve this problem ourselves, and we ought to do it. And I hope the Biden administration will see the travesty that's taking place and begin to reverse it. It seems unimaginable to me. They are beholden to the progressive left. And America, not just in Texas and Arizona and California, but Americans all across this country will be worse off for this for an awfully long time to come, and it'll be a more dangerous place, Jay.
Mike, we appreciate your comments. As always, Mike Pompeo, Senior Counsel for Global Affairs and former Secretary of State and Director of the CIA. Your support of the ACLJ makes all of this possible, Logan. And, again, look what we've heard from today. I mean, just on today's broadcast, the former Director of National Intelligence, our experts, then the Secretary of State, all part of the ACLJ team. I didn't mean to
that's right. You can join us also as well. You can be part of that team. Go to ACLJ.org. You also brought up the cover-up campaign. Go to ACLJ.org/cover-up. Take a look at that new project that we have as well. And we'll be back later today with the Secular Brothers podcast. Join us at secularbrothers.com.